Hi, everybody. Before we get to another great interview, the Two Opinionated podcast could really use your help. And it's easy, it's free. IMDb, which is the entertainment database, imdb.com, named us a top 100 podcast. We came in at number 82. That's a big deal because there's 15 million podcasts and growing. So to be named to anybody's top 100 list, pretty big deal for us. And the way you can help is to go to imdb.com, look up the Two Opinionated podcast, and that's it. Just bringing our page up. That traffic really helps us out. Our YouTube channel is MeisterCon Pod. All we ask is that you subscribe. It's also free, but that really helps us to attract these amazing guests that we keep bringing on the program. And that's it. 2 easy ways for you to support us, and we would really appreciate the help. Now let's get to that interview. Hi, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Two Opinionated. I am so excited today. You guys know I'm a comic book guy. I've got comic book legend, one of my favorite writers, Chuck Dixon. So welcome, Chuck.
Hey, people of Earth.
Yeah, I'm going to start. This isn't how I normally start, but I'm going to start this way because I'm curious what your thoughts on this. So, you know, when I was a comic book owner back in the 80s and 90s, you know, I went to a lot of conventions and I loved them, but they were it wasn't like conventions today. It was only writers and artists. That's it. You know, there was no, and honestly, it was about 90% male. You know, there wasn't a lot of females coming. So some things, in my opinion, have really improved. You know, the cosplay, I think, is a good way. You've gotten, it's much more diverse. You've brought in a lot of the women. Love all that. But you've kind of, the writers and the artists kind of got pushed aside a little bit. So you've got, you've still got them there, but the big draw now is Hollywood. You know, and I get that. But for me, you know, the old timer, I'm still, if I go to a convention, I'm at the, you know, I'm with the comic book guys. I just wonder, what do you think about that? Is the overall good worth the change, or did we lose something?
Well, I mean, I'm old enough that I remember the name of the woman who was at the first couple of comic conventions I went to. She's the only one there. Yeah, I mean, just today, my buddy Sergio Cariello announced he's going to be at Tampa Bay Comic Con. And so I checked, I said, well, I wonder who else is going to be there. And I checked the guest list, and it's all, you know, TV has-beens and you know, movie character actors and stuff like that. Way down the list, there's like 2-3 comic book guys.
Yeah.
So to me, it's, you know, for comics, obviously it's not a good thing. For people that run conventions, it's probably great. I mean, apparently they're making a lot of money. They're doing a lot of these things, but for comic guys, it's pretty much a bust. And for comic book retailers, it's a bust because it's just not about comic books anymore.
Not anymore. I figured you kind of thought the same way I did. And you mentioned the one girl that went to the convention. I figured out really quick that if I brought a girl with me to run my table, we do 3 times the business.
Well, that's the woman I remember. Jim Warren used to bring this girl to the cons to sell at his table. You know, the guy who published Creepy, Eerie, and Vampirella. Yep. And she would usually be in costume, and everybody knew her name.
Yeah, I'm sure. It was, you know, like back when I first had the stores, if a woman walked in, even if it was just maybe to pick up her son or something, the whole store just stopped. Yeah. I was like, they're never coming back if you guys keep doing that.
Oh man, yeah, it's changed. I mean, some things for the better, some things not. I mean, you know, once upon a time, women were the drivers of comic sales. I mean, they bought more comics than the guys, and a lot of people don't realize that. Through the 50s and 60s, the girls were buying a lot of the comics.
My mother was a big Katie Keene fan, and she still got those comics, and those comics in the back of them would have the paper dolls in them.
Yeah, all that stuff. Yeah, I mean it, and you know, I always thought that the success of the X-Men in the 80s and 90s was largely due to they had a large portion of their audience was women buying the
now that you say it, you're exactly right, because the women that would come into the store 9 times out of 10, it was for the X-Men.
Yeah, because I mean, Claremont, by design or by accident, created a series. He had a lot of female characters in it, and he had a lot of the soap opera stuff. And I'm not putting it down. Women like a more complicated story than men.
Well, X-Men had it.
Yeah. I mean, it was a complex storyline. A lot of the interpersonal relationships. Guys buy comics to see two guys beat each other up, but women, they wanted a little bit more. X-Men delivered that. I think my strong sales on Nightwing was largely in part to including a lot of that kind of stuff in Nightwing.
Yeah. No, I think you're exactly right. Which, by the way, my son Brett that does the hard stuff for the podcast, the editing and stuff. You had a huge effect on him because his favorite character is Robin. His second favorite character is Nightwing, and he grew up, reading all those stories, and that to this day is still, what gets him going as far as comic books.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know.
That's pretty nice.
Thank him or apologize.
Yeah. Well, you were a Comico guy. A lot of people don't remember Comico. I was a big fan. I was really disappointed when the Grendel project kind of got sidelined, because there was a time there several years ago where somebody was working on a Grendel project, and it just never came to fruition. But you had Robotech, you had Johnny Quest, the Evangeline. I think that was one of your early books.
That was my first regular comic book. They lived within driving distance of where I was living, and so when I heard a comic book company was opening in Norristown, Pennsylvania, and I was living in Birdsboro, Pennsylvania, I ran right down there and just pestered the hell out of them until they started, giving me some work. So, that's how that started. Just because they were local, they were attainable. They needed help. They were a bunch of young guys.
They were new.
Yeah, they really didn't know a whole lot about the business, but they learned quick.
Yeah, they learned quick because they came out. I was a big Speed Racer fan, and there was a Now Comics came out with Speed Racer, Astro Boy, and some of those, and it was around that time period. Right. Yeah. There's a lot of those small companies that just aren't there anymore. I kind of miss them. They, because they all, the overall product maybe not quite as good as Marvel or DC. Maybe it's debatable, but they all had their titles that did really well. They were really well written. Yeah.
I mean, you know how it is. Every comic book is somebody's favorite.
That's right.
And every comic book is some comic shop's #1 seller. Yeah. So, they did good. They delivered quality product, but in the end, comics is a tough business. And, as a retailer, a couple of bad months and
it's rough. Well, the reason I closed my stores was when Marvel went bankrupt. I was like, it's over. So I got out. I never actually lost any money or anything. I got worried.
You.
Yeah, I know. That's why I was worried though. I was like, oh boy, I'm getting out with that. And I'll start. I know retail is a good thing, So comic book store when you're a single guy in college, pretty great. Once you start a family, have kids, it's a little rougher to make a living on that.
Yeah, it's tough to sit at the dinner table and look them in the eye. I mean, I had a buddy, he owned 3 stores in the early 90s, and man, when that collapse hit him hard.
Yeah.
I mean, he ended up down to 1 small shop within a couple of months.
It was rough. So, I remember that time. It was the 90s is not my favorite comic book time. There was some good stuff that came out in the 90s, but there was so much negative stuff that came through in that decade that that's not my favorite decade. Love the 70s, 80s, 90s, a little iffy on that.
Yeah. 90s is I don't know. 90s was a missed opportunity.
Agree.
Because they had an enormous audience, but I think in the end, they largely failed that audience.
Yeah. I think they kind of, in my opinion, they really hurt the collecting side of comic books in the 90s because they so oversaturated the market with stuff. You know, before you had to search a little bit to find those certain issues, you know, first appearances, that type of stuff. But in the 90s, it was easy. You know, you could get first issues, special covers, all that stuff, and it was available to everybody, which sounds like a good thing. But if you're a collector, it kind of killed it.
Yeah, and from a reader point of view, that all would have been fine if the quality of the material inside the comics was up to snuff, and it really wasn't. I mean,
No, other than the
majority of it
page
was
quality was pretty good.
the what?
The page quality was pretty good. What was
Yeah,
on the page, not the best.
No. I mean, you know, you had an emphasis on the art end of it that was misguided. You know, comics are a mix of words and pictures, and they kind of abandoned the words thing to their detriment, because in the end, there was nothing to bring the readers back every month.
Well, and they got X-Men's perfect example. It got too spread out. So if you're, you know, it was one thing when I started collecting, comics were like a quarter. You know, when they jumped up to $3, $4, $5 a book, and you spread a story over 10 or 12 books that, you know, you got to buy each month, I think that hurt them in the long run.
Yeah, because people are either, I'm not going to do that, or I'm going to wait till they collect them.
Right. Well, I do that now. I don't buy too many single issues. I normally buy the you know, the paperbacks.
Well, the value is not there. It's just simply not there.
I miss those days, though. You know, the new comic book day. You sit down. I always loved it in the shop because, you know, comic book people, especially back then, 90% of them the best, and they would come in early on a Wednesday and just wait for the new comics to show up. But they wouldn't be pushy about it. They'd just be talking, enjoying the stuff they love about comics, and they're very patient while you counted in the books and separating them out for your subscribers, all that stuff. They would wait sometimes for hours, and then they'd pick up their books and take off. They just make an evening out of it.
Yeah, it was like Christmas morning once a week.
Every Wednesday.
Every Wednesday.
What was your comic when you were growing up?
What do you mean?
Well, like, what was the one you were reading, your favorite comic growing up?
I probably have to say Spider-Man. I mean, I read every kind of comic. When I was a kid, comics were everywhere. But Spider-Man is one I look forward to the most, and that I would actually look for. And back then, Marvel had terrible distribution, so you really did have to look for them.
You had to look.
Yeah, you had to hop on the bike and go from drugstore to drugstore.
So a lot of newsstands back then.
Yeah, well, I lived in a suburban community. I look forward every once in a while. I'd go to my grandmother's in Philadelphia, and she would have the newsstand guy hold all the Marvels for me. And then I would go and pick and choose which ones I wanted. But I was in suburban Philly, and I had to jump on the bike and go all over the place. You know, if I was looking for the next issue of Spider-Man or the next issue of Fantastic Four. I remember setting my my sister's boyfriends on a hunt for Fantastic Four Annual #1. So it was hard to find. I tell you, no, Silver Surfer #1, man, that was hard to find.
I remember that. It was a tough one to find.
I had to buy it off another kid. So that's how bad it was.
I remember those days.
Yeah.
We did half the stuff we did at the comic shop was trading for things that we needed. I traded for, you know, comics for a refrigerator, a TV, satellite TV. You know, I had back then it was Prime Star, but I had that. I traded for that. Just about everything we had in the store. I just traded books for it.
Wow.
Well, you know, I was a young guy that the only asset I had was comics.
That was your currency.
That was it. That was the currency. And we trade. I'd trade them for Star Wars toys. You know, and this was before the prequels came back out, so probably more like the 80s. And then the prequels came out, and I did great on that stuff because I had all those toys, and that was just dumb luck. I just loved the toys. I see you got a copy of Airboy behind you. That was one of your books with Eclipse.
Yep. That was a big. That was like I got two big breaks at the same time. I got on Airboy and I got on Savage Sword of Conan, basically within a few months of each other, and then I was able to go full time in comics then.
Yeah, that's awesome. Did you ever get to work on Spider-Man?
No, I have one experience with Spider-Man. Larry Hama at Marvel, he talked me up to all of the other editors because he liked what I was doing with Conan. And he said, go to the Spider-Man editor and submit. And so I submitted a story, and the Spider-Man editor said it was stupid and that I wrote with obvious contempt for the character. I was like, contempt for the character? I love this character. And he didn't like the story. And then 6 months later, he wrote a story very similar to mine.
Oh, that's terrible.
Yes, it happens all the time in comics. It happens all the time.
Well, I know. As fans, we know, because
Yeah.
you look at DC and Marvel, and there's copies all over the place.
Oh yeah. Constantly looking at each other's books and just, I mean, the thing is, for the longest time, whatever Marvel did, DC was going to do it in 6 months.
Yeah,
So,
you're right. Yeah, you're exactly right. You're the reason. My best friend, so we've been best friends since kindergarten. He loves Conan, and it's because of you. That's
wow.
when he was reading, was when you were writing on Conan. He loves it.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
that's pretty good. Is there a one of your properties, one of your books that you worked on that has never got made into anything? Would you like to see it on a screen at some point?
Yeah, there's an issue of the Nom that I wrote,
Yeah.
called The Creep. I'd like to see a movie of that. It
Oh,
was
that's interesting, because I love the Nom. That was it was a good book. But yeah, that's that surprise. Your answer surprises me, but I actually kind of love that, because yeah, you
it's
could
a
make
story.
good.
It's a story I wrote all in one sitting. It just sort of came out of me, like I was touched by God or something, and I just wrote it all in one shot. And it's still to this day one of my personal favorite thing of anything I ever wrote in comics.
Yeah, I kind of love that. That makes me want to go back and look that one
Yeah,
up. I've still got most of my Nom
it's the
comics.
Nom number 66, The Creep.
66. All right. Yeah,
So
I'll go dig that one out. I'm pretty sure I probably got that one. I've still got most of that run, so I'll check that. I don't know why. It's weird when you close a store, the things that you end up keeping for some reason.
yeah, I think we've all done this. You go through your comic collection, you're sorting it or rebagging it or whatever, and you're like, I didn't know I liked this comic so much.
I got a lot of issues of this.
Yeah, it's like, wow, Brave and the Bold. I almost like every issue. I didn't even realize I liked it that much.
So, when you were doing Batman, some of those stories are some of my favorites, and you brought Bane into being at that time. What do you think about all the different versions of Bane that we're getting?
It's hard to get my head around that, he's become a household name.
Yeah.
You say Bane and people know what you're talking about. And then all of I got Rubbermaid tubs full of Bane action figures, and they're all different. It's crazy. There's always new stuff coming out. It's kind of neat. But the thing is, when Denny O'Neil wanted a villain, to establish a new villain during the Nightfall run.
Yeah.
I was the only one really complaining and sweating, saying, but this character's got to be popular. How do you create a character to be popular? Because if he isn't popular, if he doesn't take off with the readers, this whole Nightfall thing isn't going to work.
Yeah.
And
you're right.
Denny got tired of me complaining about it and said, okay, if you think it's such a tough job, you go home and do it. I'm leaving it up to you. You just do it. And, they told me that Graham was going to be my artist. And so I called Graham and just talked out loud, and we just shot things back and forth. And, Bane is the result.
Yeah. Amazing. Where'd the initial idea come from? And did it change before we saw it in the comics?
No, it didn't change that much. I wanted him to have a traumatic childhood, the same as Bruce Wayne, but different. And the kind of childhood that would turn him toward the bad rather than the good. So he would share that with Batman. And also, going in, we knew he had to be Batman's physical and intellectual equal. Not just any thug can beat Batman up. He was a chess master. He was a mastermind kind of character, despite his, fearsome appearance. And from there, just want to kind of thinking about Man in the Iron Mask,
Love
thinking
that.
about what I read prior to that about in North Korea, you could be sentenced to serve the prison sentence of a relative who had committed a crime that they couldn't
Wow.
catch.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, wow, what would it be like to be a child in prison serving your father's sentence? And I thought, whoa, what if you were born to a life sentence? And it all just sort of
Yeah.
came together after that. And then the name, I just went to the thesaurus and looked up evil, and I go looking down the list, and Bane. That's
Oh, I
good.
love that.
And I called my editors and said, I want to call the character Bane because he had no name up to that point.
Right.
And they all said, "Oh, we hate that. Oh, we'll come up with something better," but they never did.
Like, no, you won't.
No, you won't. So 3 days later, they're all calling him Bane.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I love that. And it's honestly, most of the Batman villains came from early on in the series. Bane's really the newest, villain that we've gotten that's really stuck in the collective consciousness.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I mean, you got Penguin, Joker, Catwoman,
Riddler,
Two-Face, and it pretty much ends there as far as ones that are household names.
right?
I mean, there have been some great films. I like Killer Croc. I really like Ventriloquist. Ventriloquist is like the last great Batman villain just before Bane. But
those are actually some really good stories.
Yeah. I just love the Ventriloquist. I mean, when we were doing Nightfall, we did the Arkham Escape. We're in the room at the summit, and I said to Alan Grant, because he had created Ventriloquist, I said, "Would you let me have the Ventriloquist? Would you let me run wild with that character? Because I love that character." And he said, "Yeah, go nuts." So, but I mean, most of the Batman villains were created, I guess. You get to the 50s, and that's the end. Mr. Freeze. I mean,
Mr. Freeze. Yeah, Poison Ivy. You got it.
Yeah, Poison Ivy's probably the last of that group. She was created in the 60s.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And that's what I mean. And then, now you're right. There's a ton of villains that I loved.
Yeah.
But just as far as the kind of global appeal, Bane was kind of the last one we've had with Batman.
Yeah, seriously. I mean, once you get to the character being a joke on The Simpsons, it's like, okay, I've arrived.
I saw you did some work for Bongo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They invited me to do a Treehouse of Horror. They were inviting a lot of guys in comics to do that. And then once I did it, I said, I really like this. Can I just submit some plot lines? And they were like, sure. And then
it amazes me that there's plot lines left for The Simpsons.
Hey, if it wasn't for my wife, I wouldn't have been able to do it because she kept saying, "Have they ever done this?" And I'm like, "No, they've never done that."
That's
or
good.
Yeah, they've done that. And I would take her, "Have they ever done this?" and submit it.
I'm guessing that some of them they hadn't done, so you were able to do them.
No, they had not done. I mean, she came up with a great one about the cat lady. I mean, nobody had ever thought about the cat lady and her origin and everything. And she came up with all that. And it was so good, they stole it for the show.
Well, are you, does she get some residuals on the side for that?
No, there's a barrier between the comic book people. You sign everything away. The upside was that Bongo was paying the highest page rates in comics at the time. So, like, okay.
And they made the most of The Simpsons because they had a bunch of titles there for a while.
And they were doing, that's the frustrating thing about Bongo. They sort of just stopped publication.
Yeah.
And I was like, I can understand your sales aren't that great here in the United States. But over in Europe, like in the Netherlands and in Germany, The Simpsons was the #1 best-selling comic.
Really?
And I'm like, why don't you just keep it going for the European market?
Yeah, that would seem to be
surprised the European publishers didn't say, hey, can we take this over?
Yeah.
But, they didn't.
Yeah, that is kind of surprising because you would, anytime something's successful, somebody wants it.
So, yeah, because you look at like Disney, I mean, Disney comics are like a non-entity here from like the 70s onward. But in Europe, they took them over and, they're still going strong.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's interesting, the differences in Europe and our tastes. Some are similar, but there's a lot of differences.
Yeah.
they had a more mature comic book scene than we did when I was growing up. You know, their comics tended to be a little more mature.
Well, they didn't associate comics with children in Europe.
Right.
You
Yeah,
know?
that's a very good point. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think I told you, I talked to Peter Hogan, and you know, he worked on a lot of those books back in that time and stuff. And he
Yeah.
kind of said that, you know, he had the freedom to not worry so much how it was going to affect someone younger because that wasn't the
Right.
audience.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you know, they did books for kids, they did books for adults, they did books for teens. I mean, it's kind of like manga in that way. There was a greater variety, and they didn't, you know, they were like a broader audience, and also their marketing was different. I mean, like Benelli comics were only sold at train stations. I mean, that just amazes me. And they did, you know, they were selling millions of copies a month at train stations.
What's the comic book company that isn't here anymore that you miss the most?
I really miss Eclipse because
Eclipse
I
is
liked
probably
work.
mine.
Yeah, I liked working with Kat and Dean, and Dean's the greatest guerrilla marketer ever to be in comics. You know, we were talking beforehand. He hired Bo Smith to help him with marketing, but Dean was really a genius at selling um, comics and getting his comics noticed, because you know they were a small company just running it basically out of their house,
Yeah.
and but they were a major player in the 80s, early
Well,
90s.
I told you I used to, or we used to give Bo a hard time when he come in the store because when he first started, that was the joke. You know, he
Yeah.
was making comics out of his garage and, and selling.
The other company I miss is CrossGen, because it
Oh,
was
I've
such an
forgotten
awesome
about them.
experience. Yeah, yeah, it was an awesome experience being in the same building with your creative teams, and I still miss my office there. It was nobody will ever do that again, but it was great while it lasted.
Well, yeah, everything's virtual now. You can just work at home and kind of do that.
Well, even just I mean, nobody'd ever had a comic company where everybody was there.
Right.
You know,
Yeah, it surprises me. I would assume that Marvel or DC would have had everybody.
it's so expensive. It's
Yeah.
really expensive, and um, they probably didn't want to. I always found that DC and Marvel, they didn't really like their talent talking to each other.
Well, they
They,
didn't want to lose anybody.
well, they wanted everything handled through them, you
Yeah.
know, because I remember a few times saying, well, like I was talking to my artist, you shouldn't talk to your artist. You should tell us what you want, and we'll tell him. I was like, that's crazy.
Yeah, it is kind of crazy because you would think you'd lose some things in translation.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, you need a closer collaboration,
Yeah.
and looking at the results out of CrossGen, you can see the fruits of a closer collaboration, because damn, those comics look great.
They
And
did. I'd forgotten about that company, and you're
oh
right. And
man,
it visually very appealing.
we you know, the one thing CrossGen accomplished was changing the way American comics look.
Yeah.
Marvel and DC had to up their game after CrossGen.
Well, yeah,
And
they had to, that's what we were talking about earlier. The one thing you noticed in the 90s, the paper quality kept getting better. You know, you got glossy print and that type of stuff, and it popped from the page instead of looking more like newspaper type of print. So
it also would allow for more color variation, which CrossGen really took advantage of. I mean, with their advancements in computer coloring and everything else. I mean, that was the thing that amazed me most at CrossGen. You'd watch the colorists working, and you know, they're just the hands going back and forth, you know, filling
yeah,
in stuff on this huge screen, and you're looking at something like, this guy's putting, like, you know, backlighting and undershadowing on this little thing, and then when he pulls back, it's like something in the background on panel 3.
yeah.
It's like, holy crap, there's so much data here on this page, you can't even see it all.
What do you think? Well, I'm jumping all over the place, but speaking of Graham, I just finished Joe Frankenstein. Are we getting some more of those?
Yeah, we're doing a third one. The plot's done, and Anthony Gonzalez Clark is going to be doing the artwork on it. In fact, I just saw artwork today on it, and that'll be out, I think, the beginning of next year. It's called Joe Frankenstein: The Eye of Ra,
Oh, I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
So
really enjoyed that. It brought a lot of nostalgia feelings with me. You know, I grew up in every Halloween they would show all those Universal monster movies like overnight. You know, the black and white
oh
ones
yeah.
and stuff, and I'd
Oh
stay
yeah.
up, you know, until I felt conked out watching those, and it brought back some of those feelings, even though it was more of a modern story. You know, it had some of those elements and characters and stuff that I loved from the movies.
Yeah, I mean, my parents used to let me go to bed early on Saturday night, so and then wake me up at 11:30 to see Chiller Theater. That's where I saw all those
I
movies.
love Chiller Theater.
And Graham is, I mean, I really like those movies, but Graham is just dyed in the wool fan. I mean, he's just devoted to those.
Yeah.
And when he was talking about Joe Frankenstein for years, and he couldn't get anything going on it. And he talked to me about it. And originally, his Joe Frankenstein was going to be like a Doc Savage kind of character. It was He-Man, Lantern Jaw He-Man.
Yeah.
And I said, maybe that's a mistake because like that's all been done. I said, what if it's somebody that has to learn? What if it's a newbie? What if it's and I said, look at Harry Potter. What's
Yeah.
going on there? I said, why don't you make it a young kid who doesn't know anything about this legacy, and he has to learn all this stuff,
That's a good idea.
grow into the role, and that's really where he said, okay, well, can you come on and write it with me? And we were off to the races then.
It had a little bit of the movie from the 80s, Monster Squad, had a little of those vibes.
Yeah, a little bit of
I
that.
kind of like that, which Joe Frankenstein would make a good movie. Like that'd be a fun movie.
Yeah, we've already seen a screenplay written, and it's stuff's in the works. So
Oh,
but it's Hollywood, so God knows. But there's interest in it. I should say that.
yeah, yeah.
But
Well, that's exciting. Yeah, because that was one that I kept seeing. I was like, I need to read that one of these days. And I finally just went ahead and got the the trade paperbacks, and it terrific. Yeah, really enjoyed that. My son's reading them now.
Yeah, it really is. It's a Graham Nolan show. I just came along for the ride. He really drives that property, but
Yeah.
I came along for the ride. My contribution was, Graham always likes that stalwart, flawless, He-Man kind of character.
Right.
And I always like characters that are worried about whether or not they're going to be able to make their next car payment. And
Yeah. Well, honestly, that's part of the reason I like your writing so well, because your characters are relatable. Even the superheroes, there's a human element that the reader can relate to, and I always love that.
Yeah, I mean, if nobody cares about your characters, nobody cares about your story, and so I try to get my characters up and running as quick as possible, make you care about them, without being too manipulative or schmaltzy, make you care about them, relate to them, mostly because of my mortal fear of boring people. Because I get questions all the time. How do you get these characters up and running so quickly? I was like, I don't want to bore anybody. I don't want anybody going, I don't care about this guy. Throw the thing aside. And we've all watched movies where we couldn't give a crap if they all died in an asteroid strike.
That's truth. There's nothing worse than watching a movie and not caring about the characters.
No. In a good movie, you're on the edge of your seat. Will they make it? So
I enjoyed it when you worked with Epic. I think you did a little bit of Alien Legion and maybe the Hobbit adaptation, if I remember right.
Well, the Hobbit was from Eclipse.
Oh, that's Eclipse. Okay, yeah. That's were you a Tolkien fan?
Yeah. I was a Tolkien fan, and I knew the stuff. I was conversant with it, and Dean approached me from Eclipse and said, "Would you want to write an adaptation?" I said, "Oh, you have the rights," and he goes, "No, I don't." And he goes, "But," he says, "I have a uncopyrighted first manuscript of The Hobbit." He goes, "Which is pretty different from the finished version, but we can adapt that, and we don't have to license it." And then, of course, once we were underway, he contacted the Tolkien estate and told them what he was doing, and kind of held them over the barrel.
Yeah.
And said, "Look, we're doing this. You can make money off it or not." And so they said, "Okay, we'll authorize a version of The Hobbit, comic book version of The Hobbit." Dean calls and says, throw that manuscript away and get out your old paperback. We're doing the authorized version. And so I had to do a bunch of rewrite at the beginning. But, boy, they didn't like it. And there still is not a comic book version of Lord of the Rings because they don't like comics. This is the only adaptation that was ever been allowed.
So what did we miss? Was, what was in the unauthorized edition that was a little different?
I really don't remember.
Yeah.
I remember the intro was different, and I was writing it like a Disney movie.
Yeah.
I was taking off from it because it wasn't the actual Hobbit.
Yeah.
And then once we started on the authorized, okay, now I'm adhering. None of the words in here are going to be mine. They're all going to be Tolkien's. I'm going to stick strictly to what he wrote here. So that creative freedom was taken away, but I like the end product a lot.
I mean, it's not as difficult, I think, to adapt the Hobbit as you would think, because Tolkien, he loved describing the scenery so much, and you didn't really have to do that in the comics. You could just kind of show it.
Well, yeah, I mean, Dave Wenzel, who's doing the art, I mean, he was a big fan too, so he already knew how he wanted everything to look.
Yeah.
So that wasn't a problem. The hardest part of it is we didn't have a lot of real estate. It's 3 prestige paperbacks, which really was not enough room to do the Hobbit correctly, unless you really cram the pages with panels, which I hate to do. I won't do that. So I had to trim a lot of stuff that didn't necessarily move the story forward. I mean, I ended up having to cut out Bjorn. He's my favorite Tolkien character. A werebear. Come on. I had to cut him out entirely because as cool as his scenes were, they didn't advance the story. They really didn't have anything to do with the whole story.
Was there ever a thought just to do it as a monthly?
No. He didn't want to do it as a prestige. He wanted to get into the book market.
Yeah.
He wanted he wanted that slicker, more book feel to it than doing it as a comic. If he had done it as a comic, the Tolkien estate probably would have said no. But because he was presenting it in a I don't know, a more respectable format.
A little classier presentation.
Yeah. I mean, he wanted, and a lot of the stuff Eclipse was doing was outside of that. Dean didn't care about comic book formatting. He just did what he thought was best for the project. Yeah. I don't know if you remember Reed Fleming, World's Toughest Milkman, but that was done in a really weird trim size. It was not a standard comic because the artist wouldn't draw to that format. So
I guess that I may have noticed it at the time, but just didn't dawn on me what was going on.
Yeah, because it was like unbaggable.
Oh, you're right. It was unbaggable.
And that's all anybody cared about at the time. Yeah. And that's a weird thing is I'm dealing with a lot of crowdfunding guys now. And I'm trying to talk to them. I'm like, look, you're never going into the comic shop. Let's forget about these trim sizes.
Right.
Let's forget about being baggable because you're never going to the comic shop anyway. Make the damn comic any size you want. So
that's truth anymore.
We're doing something big.
Yeah.
From Castalia House, and it's European comic album size. Why not?
Yeah. It's almost magazine size.
Well, yeah, it is actually magazine size, but I think of it as European comic album because the way it's formatted inside and everything else. And I really, this and My Sister Suprema were both doing this size. So
I kind of like that. I'm okay with that because you're right. Like I said before, the collecting's different now. I mean, people still collect the older stuff, but the newer stuff, it's mostly about just reading the material, and a lot of people consume it online, and which I cannot read a comic book on my phone. Can't do it.
No, I hate it. I've tried it and I don't like it.
No.
There's something about the tactile feel. I don't know how it is to everybody else, but if I read something on a computer or on a Kindle or whatever, I don't remember it after I read it.
Yeah.
There's something about holding the book that actually helps you remember what you read.
You're right. Yeah. Yeah. I love holding a book or a comic book or a magazine, newspaper. I want those in my hand, and print media is kind of disappearing.
And education experts will confirm that there is a tactile portion to reading and learning and remembering for whatever reason.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any kind of conventional sense, but that's just the way it is.
Yeah. Yeah, who knows why? But
Yeah. Well,
there
someone
you
knows
go.
why, but it's not us. We'll learn someday.
Well, I don't know that we were meant to just spend all our time, as I'm saying this as we're talking on Zoom, but on screen. So if I remember right, you did some of the Marvel DC crossover stuff.
I did Punisher Batman.
Yeah, that's what I thought. That's what I thought. What yeah, like as a fan, I was pretty excited about those. What was your thoughts on it? As a writer?
Well, I've been pushing for 2 years to do a
Yeah.
Punisher Batman crossover. I was working in the Batman offices. I was working with Don Daly and Punisher, and Tom DeFalco kept saying no to crossovers, and then they do a Punisher Archie crossover. I'm like, what the hell?
I think I still got that comic too.
Oh God! So I remember calling Don Daly. I said, "What are you thinking?" Right? And Don thought different than the rest of us. So so eventually, with the Nightfall and Batman having huge sales and obviously much bigger sales than the Punisher had,
Yeah.
DC proposed a crossover, and DeFalco finally said yes. And I got the J.R.R. one. And I was, oh my God, Archie Goodwin is my editor. I was in comic book heaven, total comic book heaven. I loved writing every single page of that thing because I'd thought about it for 2 years. I knew everything I wanted to do. And, it's one of my favorite projects.
Yeah, I loved it. That's why I brought it up. But do you think we'll ever get those crossovers like that again?
I'll tell you, they talk about how to get people back into the comic shops and get people interested, and I think crossovers is the answer.
Yeah, I agree.
They need to do these because, you can go, well, we're rebooting our universe, or this character died, or this character is asexual now, or whatever.
Right.
That's not going to bring anybody back. Nobody, they don't believe you.
Well, yeah, because we've learned. Yeah, they're not really gone. You're going to bring them back in a couple of months.
Yeah, but you say Green Lantern on the Planet of the Apes, like, okay, I might want to check that out. I'm gonna at least take a look at that. I'm gonna be real curious.
Now I really want them to make that book.
Now, if you think back, and you remember this, in the 70s, the comic book business was in bad shape.
It was.
I mean,
yeah.
Sales were cratered. They were horrible. What did Marvel and DC do to pull themselves out of that? Superman meets Spider-Man. And
You're right.
that
Yeah.
was a huge event, and that brought a lot of readers back to comics. And the most important thing about that project is that DC and Marvel realized we have only one chance to make a first impression here. We got to put everything into that to make it the best comic book we could possibly produce. And it's an awesome comic.
Yeah.
And that really pulled them out of the mire. That really got people back interested. And it's like, do that again. I love crossovers anyway. I'm a total crossover whore.
Yeah.
But do that again, because it's the only way to generate interest and generate curiosity where you don't feel like you're going to get cheated, and then do the best job you can. Because I've seen some crossovers like, well, that's interesting, and then I read it and it's like, oh man, you really didn't put any effort into that.
It's too it's very generic when you read it.
Yeah. So but I really think that's really the only way out is do these crossovers.
Yeah, I kind of love that idea. Because I know I would go that's one I would actually go to a comic store and buy. I wouldn't just order it.
No, seriously, I'm the same way. I mean, I see a crossover that interests me, I'll check it out, and I don't usually check out new comics.
Yeah, same. Yeah, same. I usually it's by accident how I find comics now. If I see something and I'm like, well, that looks interesting, then I'll read it. But like where before I was buying as a collector, so I was buying every month, because I wanted to run. Now I jump around. So I might read a story, but when that story's over, I move on to something else.
Yeah. I mean, I mean, it's been a long time. I don't think there's too many titles that keep a creative team on for a very long time like they used to. Mm-hmm. So there's no reason to, follow a book. I mean, you're like me. There were books I followed for years and years and years.
Yeah. Same. Did you get to work on G.I. Joe maybe at some point?
I worked on G.I. Joe at IDW.
Yeah.
Yeah,
The only reason I bring it up is because I remember when Marvel was putting out the G.I. Joe, and that first issue was coming out, and it had the fancy paper, which was one of their early ones that had the fancier paper. I remember bugging my parents. I was like, I gotta buy not just one, I gotta buy like, as many as I can get a hold of. And they're like, well,
right.
they're $1.50 a piece.
Oh my
And
gosh.
I was like, and I think I got 10 or 15 copies of it, and I was like, I'm gonna make a fortune on these someday. And then what happened? It wasn't number one that was worth the money, it was number two. And I
Yep,
have one
because
copy of that.
number two had the short print run.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's always the case. Dang.
As a kid,
Wow.
I didn't know. I was just like, "Whoa, that's gonna be cool. I better grab those up." And
Yeah,
then,
yeah.
why would you turn around and not do any print run on the second issue? I was like, "Wow."
Well, orders go down. You know how it is. The orders always crater. I mean, I remember I did a book at Epic called Law Dog with Flynn Henry,
Yeah.
and they sent the royalties for issues 1 and 2 at the same time, and thank God they did, because the first check was a little over $10,000, and the second check was like $265. And I called Flynn on the phone and I said, "Get down to your mailbox. We got a royalty check today, right?" So he goes down to his mail and he takes his phone with him, so I can hear this like radio drama. He goes down to the mailbox I hear him tear the envelope open. He goes, "Whoa!" And then he goes, "Whoa!" He looks at that second check and he's cursing up a stream. And I said, "Look, thank God they sent them both together."
Yeah.
Because what if we were waiting 30 days thinking we were going to get another hot check?
Oh, that's true. Yeah, and you'd be like, "Oh."
We basically get a McDonald's paycheck the next month.
You get credit for creating Bane, as you should, but you created a lot of characters that me and Brett love that don't get talked about as much. Stephanie Brown, we were big fans of, and she was basically she was like a utility player on a baseball team. She was everybody at different points.
Right.
Well, and was it the electrocutioner?
Well, I created Electrocutioner 3. There were a bunch of Electrocutioners.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and then I didn't realize this, and I should have. Was maybe Birds of Prey was yours too?
Well, Jordan Gorfinkel came up with the concept for Birds of Prey. He was my editor and talked me into writing it. But he came up with the basic concept. But the thing is, when DC came around and said they were going to give us participation in any new characters or gadgets or things like that, I just went wild. I mean, I think I filled out over 250 participation forms in the 11 years I was at DC. I got my I signed off on everything and encouraged the artists to do the same thing, because you share the royalties with the first guy who drew something.
Oh,
and
yeah.
And on Nightwing in particular, I created new villains almost every month because I wanted him to have his own rogues gallery.
Yeah. Well, that was you needed that to keep a comic book going. You needed those recognizable villains.
Well, I never wanted him to be Batman Jr. I didn't want him to be facing Batman villains every month, so I created my own crowd.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I was like, whoa, you're just opening the floodgates here. I'm picturing all the toys and posters and underoos that are gonna be made out of this stuff, because there was money to be made.
Yeah.
And a lot of creators didn't realize that. I mean, when I created the Redbird, Robin's car, and was transformed from street legal to the Redbird, and how that would work, I did these really simple drawings of how it would work. And when they approached us about the participation, I called Tom Grummett and I said, you need to do a drawing, because he hadn't started work yet on the monthly. I said, you need to do a drawing of the Redbird, because you're going to be the first guy drawing it, and to submit with the participation forms. And he said, no, your drawings will do. I said, yeah, but if it's just my drawings, you don't get any money.
That's right. You don't get paid.
So that wouldn't be right, because I don't have to draw this dang thing over and over again. You do. And so he finally submitted a sketch of it. And he was real glad he did, because that Batman and Robin movie came out, and they had a motorcycle called the Redbird, and they sold a ton of toys off of that.
Yeah, I
So
didn't think about that, but yeah, royalties on that would be pretty nice.
yeah, the
Yes.
toys and Lego are,
Oh,
and
Lego. Yeah.
computer games. That's where all the money is in the royalties.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite Robin? Because you've done most of them.
Well, I mean, I don't like Jason Todd. I mean,
Obviously.
I grew up with Dick Grayson, so I really like Dick Grayson.
Yeah,
Obviously, I
me
wrote a
too.
lot of Dick Grayson as Nightwing, but I got a lot of affection for Tim Drake, because I was one of the guys that helped develop that
Yeah.
character.
Yeah,
And
that's a lot of it depends on who you were reading when you're growing up. Because Dick Grayson, that's my Robin, and I love him as Nightwing.
right.
Brett's is Tim Drake, because
Well,
that was who was Robin at the time.
everybody's favorite James Bond movie is the first one they saw.
Yeah, that's truth.
It
Yeah,
is
or
true.
you could do that with even the Star Wars movies.
Yeah.
I'm a New Hope guy. I saw that in the theater. I went nuts over it. My son, he loves the prequels. I'm like, they weren't that great, but he loves them, because that was the ones that came out when he was a kid.
Yeah, same here. Same with my kids. I mean, I was there opening day, 1977.
Yeah.
And the prequels, I'm like, my kids went nuts over them. So
We just did the like we took all the old home movies, from all the different weird cassette things or scrolls and stuff that nobody makes anymore, and we sent those off to have them converted to DVD. We didn't even know what was on the things, but on some of them was the Christmases right after Star Wars came out, and it's just me as a little kid, and I'm just surrounded by Star Wars toys.
Yeah, well, I wasn't a little kid and I was buying Star Wars toys.
Yeah, I mean that's the truth. Hey, I saw that you had turned down writing Expendables 2.
Oh, I didn't turn it down. I turned down the money.
Oh, okay,
yeah,
that's different. That's
yeah,
different.
yeah.
So they lowballed you a little bit.
What? Oh,
They,
yeah.
yeah.
They were paying me comic book money to write screenplay, and I'm like, nah, that ain't happening. Yeah, Sly, and he insists I call him Sly. It was Mr. Stallone the first few times, and he said, don't call me that anymore. He reached out to me when I did an Expendables comic book. I did an Expendables prequel book before the first movie, and he said he really liked how I got the characters, I got the dialogue, I got their voices. He says we're doing Expendables 2, and he says I hate the current screenplay. He says, would you come in with me and we can do rewrites?
Yeah.
So we talked back and forth, and I came up with a bunch of ideas, and he came up with ideas, and we really liked what we put together. And then he had them fly me out for a production meeting, and the production meeting went well. But as I learned later, all production meetings seem to go well.
Right.
It's when you leave the room that the real meeting begins.
Yeah.
And these guys they didn't, I didn't impress them, and they really didn't want to make any changes. The only thing they liked was I wanted to set it in a mine.
Yeah.
Part of the big climactic action would be deep within a mine, and they were all excited because they knew there was a mine in Bulgaria they could use cheap. And that's the only contribution I made to Expendables 2. And so I had to get an agent that afternoon, because they wouldn't deal directly with me. They had to deal through an agent, which I found that's another big mistake. So I got an agent, and and then he made the pitch, and then they lowballed, like really lowballed.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah,
said,
that's terrible.
I can't afford to stop writing comics to write this. That's how little money you're offering me. And Sly was really disappointed. And then I thought, well, that's the last time I'll ever hear from him. But it wasn't. He kept calling me.
Really?
And he called me. They were going to do this online. Lionsgate was going to do this online movie in chapters called Mexifornia.
Okay.
And Sly was going to be this. It was going to be CGI, all CGI, and Sly was going to play the main character. And he got me a job of writing that. And then he got me the job of writing dialogue for an Expendables video game.
Oh, yeah. Well, he was impressed with you then.
I guess it's rare in Hollywood for anybody to remember you once they're done with you. And then he kept talking to me, and I sent him some of my books, and he read them, and he wrote the screenplay for the Levon Trades movie coming out in January. And I approached him about doing comic books based on the Expendables and Rambo, and we did that. And then every once in a while he would just call me out of the blue and just to talk about nothing.
Love that.
I think he would call me sometimes to bitch about stuff because I'm not in the industry and I'm not going to share the stories. And he thought, he just wanted a sympathetic ear. And but just, I'll tell you, most people in Hollywood, I wouldn't cross the street to save their lives, or shake their hand. But he's an awesome guy. He really is.
I've always heard that.
Yeah.
Well, now I know we got to wrap up, but I do want to ask you about. I heard you were not, let's say, not impressed with the new slate of movies coming out for DC.
No, they just seem like odd choices.
Yeah.
Let's go back to the meat and potato stuff.
Why do you think they've gotten away from that? I mean, I'm not 100% against seeing some of the obscure characters and stuff that I grew up with, but that seems odd to try to put those out there for mass consumption.
Yeah, I really don't know what they're thinking. I don't know what any of their thinking is. The more I read about Hollywood, the more I realize it's money laundering. It's got nothing to do with making movies. Because I just read where Warner's gave the guy that directed There Will Be Blood, they gave him $120 million to make a movie. And the most he's ever made at the box office is $75 million. Why would
it makes no sense.
It makes no sense. I love the guy's movies, but he's not going to make you a summer blockbuster.
Right.
So even if you
seems like an odd
his
choice.
best box office, you're only going to break even.
Yeah.
It makes no sense.
I don't know if they're thinking we're doing this one just for the awards, because he does win awards.
Yeah, but there's no money in the awards.
No.
At the end of the day, you got to make some cash, and all of these studios are hurting for money. I mean, they're all deeply in debt. They spent $200 million. They're spending $200 million on the new Joker movie.
Yeah.
Well, the success of the first Joker movie was how little you spent to make it.
You're exactly right.
And you concentrated on the story. Now you're going to make this musical extravaganza for $200 million, and even if you do the same box office as the first one, you're only going to break even.
Yeah, it does seem strange. It doesn't seem like that's very good business.
No, it's what makes me think it's all about money laundering. It's not about actually making movies.
Yeah, that's
which is why so many of the movies are crap. I mean, they're just,
they've, I think a lot of us, especially comic book fans, were excited to have all this because, growing up, we didn't have a lot of choices that we got to see on screen.
Right.
But, there's been some good ones, but the majority have been kind of, it's just okay. It's not great.
Well, I think the mistake comes, back in the 90s, I was working a lot with Denny O'Neil. We were all talking about, they're making this one into a movie and that one into a movie. And somebody said, well, making this into a movie validates the comic. And I said, comic book doesn't need validation.
That's right.
Comic book is the comic book.
That's somebody that isn't a comic book reader.
Yeah, it's like, it's not going to make it better. It's just going to be something different. I thought Denny O'Neil was going to hug me. Because he said, I never heard anybody say that before. I said, I really don't give a crap about all these adaptations. Because people will say, who would you cast as this? Who would you cast as that? I mean, who cares?
Yeah.
I only care about the comic books.
Has there been any of the movies that you've enjoyed?
The beginning of Marvel, I really liked Iron Man. I really liked the Ant-Man movies. And then they went completely off the rails. I haven't seen like the last 5 Marvel movies.
Yeah.
I never watched any of the TV series.
They really they saved they saved themselves from the bankruptcy, but they kind of screwed themselves up by splitting all their their properties up. That's caused a lot of headaches going forward.
Yeah, but I don't know. They really haven't saved themselves from bankruptcy because they're tens of billions of dollars in debt. Like on the Disney side with the Marvel stuff. Disney has just started getting earnings from their streaming service, and even those earnings are weak and subject to go down. Right. And they've had success with Deadpool and Wolverine, but that's really an exception to the rule. Everything else is
Yeah.
they've
Did
lost.
you go see that one?
I don't really go to the movies. I will see it
Yeah.
because, you know, like everybody
I
else.
mean, it was cool to see, you know, all the different, you know, versions of the characters we saw in the past. That was awesome. I
Right.
love that. And the banter, but between the two, really good. Dialogue was pretty good. Story to me was kind of weak, you know, because
Yeah.
it's really it didn't really matter what the story was. It was about the interaction between Deadpool and Wolverine, which is fine, but it just, you know, I was kind of like, well, they could have actually had a story where you've got some stakes. You know, there was never, you know, even though some of the fights were kind of cool, there was never any real, you didn't have a sense of danger with it, you know?
Well, that's my big bugaboo with all of the stuff, from comics to any kind of movie, is when you do sequels and all the rest of it and crossovers,
Yeah.
you got to have a story. And I really think you should think story first and character second. I mean, I don't want to see just more of this character. I want to see a really cool story with this character inserted in it. And
Yes.
I use the example of, you know, the Die Hard series. You know, you Die Hard, great movie. Die Hard 2 is virtually a remake.
Yes.
It's not anything different, and consequently, you really don't care.
Yeah.
And it's not until you get to Die Hard 3 where this didn't have to be a Die Hard movie. This was a hell of a story.
Yeah.
And
It
you
was
could
very
have,
good.
this could have been a Lethal Weapon movie. It could have been an anything movie, but you came up with a great story first, then you stick John McClane in the middle of it.
Yeah.
And that's what I think they need to think more of. I mean, I'm tired of seeing Batman movies that are about Batman. I want to see a really great action movie, mystery story with Batman in it.
Oh my gosh. Yes. I mean, yeah, Brett and I talk about this a lot. Don't you think at this point, everybody knows the origin story? Do we need to remake that again? Just
No.
put him in a good mystery where you can actually see, you know, what Batman is. You know, you can
Yeah,
see the detective and the analytical stuff side. We've all seen him, you know, fight the criminals,
right.
but that's just scratching the surface of Batman.
Yeah, I mean, I think of all of them, I mean, Spider-Man 2 is the best sequel they ever did.
Yeah,
Because, you know, okay, we know who he is, we know what motivates him and everything else. Let's put him in a hell of a story.
yeah,
And that movie has a hell of a story.
it does.
And that's what they need to do more often is, you know, because but they continually want to explore the character. Okay, we're done exploring the character.
Yeah,
You know, when
we
I went
know
to
the
see a John
character.
Wayne movie, you didn't explore the character. He
No,
was just cool, you know.
yeah, that's it. I was like, we've seen it. We know the story. You know, I
Right.
don't need to see minor changes to the origin story. We've got it.
Yeah.
You know, move
Yep.
on.
Yep.
So last one I got for you, Chuck, and
Sure.
we'll wrap up. I often tell Brett that the part of comics that I loved growing up was the fact that they were enclosed in one issue, or maybe you might have a couple issues that the story ran through, but you would get, you know, an ending pretty often with that, and it was, you know, you got more, in my opinion, more character development. You had the more of the trials they had outside of the fights with the villains, that type of stuff. And then at some point, we started doing this every year we had to come up with a story that was bigger than the previous year, and it usually had some threat coming from a different planet, or it was crossing over into multiverses. It touched every comic that they brought out, and I was never really a fan of that. And I wonder what your thoughts were on it.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of that either. I mean, I like, you know, again, it's like sequelitis. I mean, well, let's make it bigger, bigger, bigger,
Right.
bigger. No, that's not really the answer,
Yeah.
you know, because bigger isn't a story. You know, I mean, that's the challenge of writing a character like Superman, where he's practically omnipotent.
Right.
Uh, but that's the challenge. You got to rise to it. You got to, you know, okay, he's really super strong, so let's give him an intellectual challenge. You
Right.
know, if you look back on Superman's history, his most memorable stories generally have nothing to do with his strength.
You're right.
It's a puzzle to be solved, or some conflict.
Well, because
Uh,
that's where he was challenged. You know,
Exactly.
that was difficult for him, where the physical stuff usually wasn't.
Right, right. So you had to come up with something, you had to think hard, come up with clever stuff. Why is this happening? How's he going to get around it? But not by simply punching his way out of it.
Yeah.
And I think that's a lot of what's lost. I mean, as an example, when they did Batman Black and White, Mark Chiarello, the editor, when he got to the end of it, realized that all the stories in the Black and White series, no one had written a mystery. So he turned to me and said, we need at least one whodunit mystery in here. So I did one, because he knew I'd do it. And that's like endemic of what's wrong. It's comes down to lazy writing.
Yeah, I agree with that. Is there I'm guessing it's Spider-Man, but is there a character you'd like to do that you've never got to do?
It wouldn't be Spider-Man. I really, Graham and I always dream of doing a long run on the Fantastic Four someday. And it's never going to happen, but we can dream.
I'd love that.
We already know what we would do.
Hey, you'll have at least 2 readers, so
well, 4 if you count Graham and I.
That's right. Some of the comics that I was reading when I was growing up, I was pretty sure I may have been the only person reading it.
That's funny, isn't it? When you run into someone who's like, "You watched that TV show too?"
Yeah. I didn't think anybody saw that.
I thought it was just coming to my house.
Well, sir, you have to come back at some point. There's so much to talk with to you, and as we're talking, more and more comes up, and it have to have a part 2 at some point. But thank you so much for the time. It's been terrific.
Well, I think we can safely say we got along okay.
Yeah, we did all right. Our biggest problem was getting to here. We just struggled getting on screen.
There you go. Yeah, I'll be back. No problem.
Yeah. Before I let you go, is there anything that you're working on that we can kind of keep an eye out for?
Very shortly from the Rippaverse, I have a book called The Horseman that I did with Joe Bennett. And within the next few weeks, that will be announced, and you'll be able to, put your money down and get a copy of that.
Yeah, that's exciting.
Yeah.
That's one nice thing. If you're a comic book writer, you're probably going to do that till you just decide to stop.
Yeah, my wife says, "You're going to retire." I'm like, "Why? I worked so hard to do this. I'm going to keep doing it."
Yeah, and if you like what you do,
I love what I do.
Yeah. Well, how could you not?
Yeah.
I mean, come on. I'd be writing comics if I could.
I just sit in a room, make stuff up all day. I mean, what a job.
That's not terrible. Are you on social media? And if you are, where can we find you?
I'm on Facebook under my own name. I'm on X under my own name. And I have a channel on YouTube under my own name.
Oh, very nice.
Or once a week, I have a show called Ask Chuck Dixon, where you get to do what you just did.
Yeah.
And I answer your questions, and I have visuals to back up. I have receipts to back up what I'm talking about.
I wish more writers and artists, for that matter, would do shows like that, because, as fans, we love that stuff. Just top of mind stuff, asking questions and getting answers from the people that actually wrote the story.
Well, the inside baseball stuff, I probably go a little too far inside baseball, but the people that watch it seem to dig it. So,
well, I'm a baseball fan, so you got me. Who's your team?
Well, I don't mean actual baseball, but
right.
Because I don't know anything about baseball.
Yeah. I've always been I was a Big Red Machine fan. When I was little. So that's kind of, the Reds have always been my team, and it's been a long 30 years. I'll say that.
My heart goes out.
If you weren't a writer, what would you be doing?
I really can't do anything else. I could probably be working behind the counter at a 7-Eleven, which
or maybe at a comic store.
No, no, God, no. I'd be the worst comic book store employee you'd ever met. I'd be throwing people out of the store. You're reading what? You want what? Get out of here.
The best thing I ever did at the comic book store, marketing wise, was I started buying cheap cans of cola and popsicles and selling them out of the store. I made a ton of money on that stuff. I was like, best thing I ever did, because you'd have people, kids mostly, they'd spend all day, every day in the comic store just hanging out. Their moms or something would drop them off, and we were kind of like the babysitter. And I was like, we should probably try to feed these people.
They might be thirsty.
Yeah, and I was like, well, I'm not paying Coke and Pepsi prices.
Right.
Getting that big K cola in here.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, sir. This has been a real honor. I hope we can talk again soon.
I think we should.
Yeah, I do too. Right. Okay, hold on one second. Well, that was great for me. I hope the rest of you enjoyed that. But as an ex comic book store owner, that I would have went nuts back in the 80s and 90s if I could have sat down with Chuck. That was just terrific. He was awesome. I've got really fond memories of spending time with Bo Smith talking about Eclipse Comics, and Chuck's name came up quite a bit. They worked together there years and years ago. Always enjoyed that. So I hope you enjoyed that. There's so much to cover. He's done so much within the comic book world. Couldn't get to all of it. I loved his work on Moon Knight. We touched briefly on Alien Legion, but always a fan of that comic. He talked about CrossGen. I'm pretty sure he took over maybe for Mark Waid at the time with them. He's right. They had some beautiful comics at the time. He worked Image Comics on Team 7, I believe, and maybe even a little bit on Prophet, which I was thinking was a Liefeld comic, but maybe he did some work on there as well. He did Richard Dragon in the early 2000s, which was a DC character that I always enjoyed growing up. So he did that one. Connor Hawk, he's worked on Batman and the Outsiders. He did The Man with No Name. I should have asked him about that one, because he did that one for Dynamite, which was doing some Western comics then. So he did that one. Let's see. He did some work on What If. I should have mentioned that. And I cannot believe I did not bring up that he did the comic book adaptation for Eye of the World. Wheel of Time, my favorite book series. Followed closely by Game of Thrones, but I give it to Wheel of Time because they actually completed the series. But I really meant to ask Chuck about if he was a Jordan and or Sanderson fan when he adapted Eye of the World. So that's one that maybe we can talk about next time. And then I'm glad we got to talk Joe Frankenstein, even though I know Graham Nolan was kind of the driver on that one. I'm sure Chuck's contribution was probably more than what he let on. If you're finding us for the first time, thank you so much for being here. Our YouTube channel is MeisterCon Pod. Please subscribe if you go there. It's free. Really helps us out. Our website is meistercon.com. There's 825 or so episodes, audio and video versions that you can peruse. I would put our guest list up against any other podcast, any other talk show, anything. I think we've been just blessed with the best guests. So definitely check us out on meistercon.com. Thank you guys so much. Until next time. Bye, everybody.